Rainbow smell.
Rainbow smell. So,
All right, you guys ready? There will be a meeting of New Hampshire Fish and Game Commission on Tuesday, August 18th, 2026 at the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. Please be advised that this meeting is being captured on video. If we could all rise to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No comment. The public is entitled to attend all commission meetings, and when recognized by the chairman, the public may speak on any item on the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to limit public comments to the extent necessary for orderly conduct of the meetings. First action item is approval of the July 21st, 2026 commission meetings. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second. Any discussion?
A question,
Sure.
and if we don't want to talk about this now, it's okay.
Yeah.
But I have a question,
Yeah.
and if it was ever mentioned, I apologize in advance for missing. When the meeting is recorded and minutes are produced, okay, do we utilize any kind of an AI app to transfer from audio to printed?
Yes.
We do. Thank you. All right. And the reason I ask that,
Only for presentation.
only for presentations.
Yeah. It minimizes the, it gets the bullet points out there. When you have discussion on certain action items, that's not used.
All right. I don't want to belabor this, but it's,
It's a valid question.
so here's my question, further question. When I try to pay attention if I say anything that it's what I said, okay? Now, in talking or in reviewing, when I talked last meeting about the pulp company thing, Finch paper, I read my comments, okay? And it began by stating that I mentioned Finch was a 161-year-old company. I didn't remember saying that. Also, down on the third sentence, it mentions what the fallout could be of the mill going down, or the pulp mill, and it says it will eliminate feet on the ground. I have used boots on the ground, and I swear, because of some exposure to AI, that is the exact thing that AI would rephrase, okay? So that's the reason I'm asking about this. And if we are utilizing AI, I'll be done in just 1 minute, I would say publicly that I would beg every commissioner to read the minutes of every meeting carefully, especially if you're reading your own words. Because I went so far as to reach out to others and question them about the AI apps that are out there. I even called a couple of people in the medical field, okay, and asked them. And it seems like, I'm not suggesting we can hold back technology. We got to figure out a way to embrace it. But verify. You better read it, because it's not always right. So, thank you, Tanya, for confirming that.
And we do obviously put up the YouTube video that has verbatim what we say as well.
So there's a couple things related to this. The AI is not what we rely on. However, I will say, last month's audio was distorted. And so the video itself was difficult. Tanya always uses the video as sort of the, if she's reading through her notes and she has a question, she'll listen to the video and the audio associated with it. And through the video, that's where the AI often gets translated, and it was distorted. So she did rely, I would say, I can't speak for you for sure, but I know that you said to me you relied more heavily on it this time than in the past because you were trying to make sure you had the right notes and it wasn't really matching. So she was following her notes as tightly as she could in keeping with the pace of the meeting.
And if
The other thing I'd like to say is, we do take liberty, when there's long pontifications, we do take liberty and shorten to get to the core of the point that each of us is making. So like right now, she's gonna shorten what I'm saying right now. But the point is, if you think we haven't captured it appropriately, let us know, but we are not gonna capture every word that all of us are saying. We're gonna capture the main points. So this is an excellent point, I'm glad you're bringing it up.
And I just want to say that if you listen to the tape, you'll notice you couldn't hear what any of you were saying at the table because these mics weren't working. His recording is great. It was these mics on the table, so when I listened to it, all I heard was
Garble.
And I understand that. And I hope I'm not out of line in saying this, but being a dinosaur that's really learning everything I can about the AI process, okay, I really think it should be emphasized that the commissioners need to read the minutes, especially if they're going to check on what their own comments are.
I 100% agree.
And I hope you're doing that.
Yeah.
Then I know you're reading the minutes.
And I would just say, don't ever take offense,
I'm not.
Tanya, okay?
Yeah,
No
thank you,
offense.
you're good.
But I would like to add too, if you find something that doesn't look right, please let us know, okay? I mean, Tanya takes great notes, but there are times where there's a lot of conversation going on and she's getting as much as she can. She'll see with the AI if there's anything she missed. In this case, she was really trying to dig into it, but she couldn't because it was just garbage. The other thing I will mention, as an agency, we are in the process of revising our AI policy internally, so. But excellent point, and I encourage all the commissioners, please do read the notes, read the minutes, make sure they're conveying what you feel the meeting was before we approve them at the next meeting. And if you have something, please send it to Tanya, copy me, and let her know what the change is or the concern that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are these mics working today, do we know?
Yes, they are. We got a thumbs up from Alan in the back.
All right, perfect, thank you. And thank you, John. Motion on the table is to approve the July 21st, 2026 commission meetings. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Item number 2, consent agenda. The following items have been grouped together and noticed as consent agenda items to expedite action on routine matters which may not require public discussion. Commission members may remove certain items. Further public input or discussion is deemed necessary. Approval to accept the donations below in memory of Douglas Dade, Guilford, New Hampshire, totaling $150 made to the small gifts and donations accounts and game management account as follows. Robert and Brenda Dupuy, Hill, New Hampshire, $100. Tracy Upton and Kathy Parsons, Landoff, New Hampshire, for $50. Approval to accept the donations below in memory of Russell Walls, Salem, New Hampshire, totaling $300 made to the small gifts and donations account. Gerard Lindsay Balesmans, $150. Paula Bosseau, $100. Tammy and Sean Farley, $50. 2C, approval to accept the following below donations in memory of Kendall Matson of Campton, New Hampshire, totaling $235, made to the game management account, Hunter Education Program, and the small gifts and donations account as follow. Elaine Teege and Paul Yeel, $100. Chuck and Susan Bowie, $50. Arlene Corso, $50. Ethel Brown, $35. 2D, approval to accept the donation of $50 made to the search and rescue account honoring Lieutenant Bradley Morse from Richard and Susan Clemon. 2E, approval to accept the donation of $2.50 made to the Let's Go Fishing program from Carolyn Lucius of Shirley, New Hampshire. Do I have a motion to approve items 2A through 2E?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Number 3, approval to accept donations below in memory of Harry Haynes of Colebrook, New Hampshire, totaling $275 made to the Hunter Education Program. Michelle Hines and Dan Womet, $200. Brent Lyons, $50. And Joan Dickinson for $25. Do I have a motion to approve item 3?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. First information item today is the financial statement and commission budget. Kathy?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Director, Kathy Labonte, Chief of the Business Division. Last month, we went over some figures for the end of fiscal year 26, although I realize you did not have your hard copy in front of you. Now that you do have your hard copy of the entire fiscal year 26, can I entertain any questions for that financial statement? We received a whole bunch of interest, Commissioner Hodgson. You did. You missed the whole explanation. Yes, you did, but it's there. We got it. Okay? No questions? So we ended the year with an unaudited balance of $8.3 million in the Fish and Game Fund, and of course our July statement, we only have 1 month in there, but our beginning balance is $8.3 million. Our current appropriations in the Fish and Game Fund, net appropriations, $20,336,561 is expected to be utilized out of the Fish and Game Fund in fiscal year 27. We only have, as I said, just 1 month going in, but if you want to turn to page 3, we have had some good revenues coming in. Our licenses are right on par with where they were last year, and hopefully that will keep going. Being the second year of the biennium, much of the revenue is budgeted in the same pots as it was in the first year of the biennium, so there's really little, if any, change to that. Okay, thank you.
Next item on the list is overview of the animal damage program. Kat Wadiak.
So, hi everyone, my name's Kat Wadiak, so I'm the wildlife damage biologist for the department, and today I'm just going to go into a little bit of an overview of our damage program, talk to you guys a little bit about who we are and what we do, and hopefully we can get some questions answered. So to kind of jump right in, I just want to talk a little bit about who's involved in the program. So we have this really great long-standing partnership with the USDA Wildlife Services. So I actually work over in their office. We get to share a space, share a warehouse, share supplies, and share expertise, which is really helpful. So we got a nice big grouping of experience over there. This has been going on for a really long time, and we continue to be able to grow it and kind of move forward, you know, the longer we get to work together and get to know each other, which has been really great. So as part of these two groups, we have a lot of staff that can help with animal damage issues as, you know, requests come in. So I'm the damage specialist for Fish and Game Department, so I'm handling a lot of calls, especially ones that pertain to animals, you know, basically damaging anything, and that can be anything from, you know, a bear getting into a trash can to crops being destroyed by deer, and, you know, occasionally just someone saw a fox in their yard and it made them a little nervous and they want to talk about it. You know, in addition to that, we have seasonal technicians as part of the bear program. So those are both through Fish and Game, and USDA also hires a seasonal bear technician. So that really helps during this time of the year when we're dealing with a high volume of bear calls in particular. They're trained really well to help with those calls as they come in. They're specialists with a lot of the mitigation techniques we use, and they take a huge portion of that workload, which is very helpful. Then we have staff biologists. So You know, in addition to me, we have biologists both as part of Wildlife Services and Fish and Game, that depending on the region of the state that an issue may occur or the species involved in an issue that may be occurring, we're able to utilize their expertise, and we have a really good team. Everyone works really well together, so it's very helpful because, again, we can spread these calls as they come in to different people, and helps us serve people really well to get to a solution quickly. We have a really developed multifaceted approach for damage. So I would say a lot of what we're doing comes down to technical assistance and education. So as calls come in, you know, we can get those from a variety of places, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But the first thing we're doing is trying to talk to people. We're trying to come to the core issue that's going on, and we're trying to find solutions based off each individual situation. So a lot of times that's, you know, can be handled in a phone call. A lot of times we want to try to get out to people's properties to see exactly what they're dealing with, and that's something that we really like to do to get a better idea of what's going on. And then it comes down to, you know, education. Sometimes it's just as simple as letting people know why an animal is there. Could be something, you know, you have a bird feeder out, bears come to a bird feeder, education on why you should be taking those things in. Another part of you know, the education we have is equipment loans. So we have really great ability to be able to lend people equipment, which is really helpful. So a lot of people don't necessarily know everything that's out there for mitigating wildlife issues. So we have, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about details, but we're able to show people some of the options they have and teach them how to use it and kind of give them a proof of concept of how these things work. We also want to utilize our open seasons during the hunting season. So for a lot of these larger farms and things like that, you know, we really encourage people to be using open seasons, using licensed hunters, and having that, you know, into their damage mitigation techniques, just so, you know, they're kind of having these solutions going on year round. And then for our commercial growers and commercial producers in the state, we have a couple other programs that are more specialized to them. So that's going to be our depredation and pre-damage permit program, and then our bear damage compensation program. So just to get, you know, a little bit more into the technical assistance side of things, you know, we have people kind of reaching out to a bunch of different sources, and we're able to kind of funnel those into our staff. So we have a bear hotline, we have people calling the Fish and Game offices, the Wildlife Services offices have a wildlife damage hotline. We have calls coming into dispatch to our technicians. So we really try to, you know, as they come in, triage them, hand them off to the right people, and find a solution quickly. I would say we're really good at responsiveness and responding to people quickly. I think that's something our program does really well. And then when needed, getting in-person assistance, so going out to these properties, to these farms, meeting people, talking to them about their particular situation. So, you know, another important partnership we have, like a lot of other organizations and agencies in the area, is we can work with BearWise to produce information, good materials, things that are really simple for people to understand, things that have nice diagrams. So we work well with this BearWise program to kind of put out consistent messaging with a bunch of other different agencies in the area, and that can be really helpful. You know, that way we know that when a problem's coming in, we're really trying to handle it consistently moving forward. And focusing on bears is, you know, obviously important because we do tend to have a lot of bear conflict. They're a very visible species that make people nervous, and they tend to be involved with people a lot, and they tend to be involved in a lot of our conflicts. Fish and Game, we also have our own educational materials that we produce. So, you know, whether it's canvassing a neighborhood or going to campgrounds and trying to get ahead of some of these issues, we find that the education and awareness portion is really helpful. And it's really beneficial in trying to stop some of these damage complaints and issues before they come in. Hopefully people have a good understanding of how to avoid issues in the first place, and we can, you know, stop issues there before we're in the process of having to deal with destruction of property or destruction of livestock or something like that. Some of our options for equipment loans that we have for people is hazing, so harassment of wildlife is really important. We have several different options for that, from alarms, noisemakers, and those are not just for bears, these are for people having goose issues, you know, blackbirds and corn, anything like that. You know, we can have an option that we can try to work with people depending on the scale of the issue. We can find a solution that they can try. We also do exclusion, so electric fencing is a big one. That's something that's really important to our program. We do a lot of work with electric fencing, and different types of exclusion, even straps for trash cans, things like that, that we can try to help people with some of their day-to-day issues. Equipment loans, I think, are a really important part of what we do because I think people tend to be hesitant to invest in something like electric fencing off the bat if they're not sure how effective it's going to be. So being able to go out, educate them on how some of these things work, give them a proof of concept, give them a little bit of time to show that it works, makes them way more comfortable in investing in these things moving forward. So we find that a lot of people that we do loan these things to will then go out and buy their own equipment, which is really helpful. And again, those tend to be issues that are not repeat problems in the future, so it's really helpful for our program. To get a little bit more just into the hunting during the open season, we kind of talked about it. We tend to have this idea work with a lot of the programs that we have, so not only is it part of our technical assistance to recommend for some of these larger farms, hey, if you're having an issue with deer in your trees or your crops during the hunting season, maybe it's a good idea to have a hunter out there, put some of that pressure on. But we also use this because we don't actually issue permits generally during the hunting season. Occasionally we do, but we really try to encourage people to use licensed hunters during that time of year. And if a property is posted, they're actually not eligible for most of our damage programs. So if a property is posted, we can't issue compensation for damage that happens on that property, and we won't issue depredation or pre-damage tags for damage happening on that property. So we mentioned the damage permits. So these are pre-damage and depredation permits are very similar. They basically allow us to issue tags for hunting animals out of season. So if a farmer, commercial grower that needs to be commercial, is having issues in their crops during the summertime, we can issue them a permit to designate an agent to hunt those animals out of season. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the farmer. So that's important for a few reasons. One, not every farmer is a hunter. Sometimes they just don't have the experience or the desire to, be out hunting in their fields. They also don't always have the time to do that. So being able to designate an agent to come in and use these tags is really helpful for the farmers. So an agent can be any licensed New Hampshire hunter if they don't have a violation within 5 years. Like I said, they have to be what we consider a commercial grower, which means they're making at least $2,500 a year from their crops. And if they are meeting that commercial threshold and their land is not posted, any farmer in New Hampshire, any commercial grower is eligible to receive 2 pre-damaged deer tags. So they can get ahead of an issue. They can apply for these without any kind of damage threshold and have them in their arsenal as something to use. And we do have a lot of farmers that request these tags and may not use them. They may not get an opportunity. They might get the tags and not see a need. But they are something that's available. These are only for deer, but they are available to farmers. If they get these tags, they use them, and they continue to see issues, we can then move into what are called depredation permits, which again are very similar, but those do have a damage threshold. So they need to see substantial damage on that property to continue to issue permits. And we're usually using about a 10% damage to crop threshold to issue depredation permits. Depredation permits can be they're mostly for deer is what we're mostly issuing them for, but they can be for other animals as well, as those animals may be causing damage. So occasionally we issue for bear and occasionally we issue for turkey, but the vast majority is for deer. Just to give people a little bit of an idea of how this breaks down most years, I would say last year was a pretty typical year. So we issued pre-damage tags to 43 growers. So those are the ones that don't have a damage threshold that any grower in the state is entitled to. So that comes out to 86 tags. Of those 86, 32 of those were filled with deer this year, or last year. From there, we generally go to deer depredation tags. So deer depredation tags generally are growers that filled those 2 pre-damage tags, and then still we're seeing substantial damage, but occasionally, in some situations, growers can go right to depredation tags. But you can see we had 14 growers compared to the 43 that went into deer depredation, and they took 27 deer on 45 tags. We also had one grower who was having substantial turkey damage, so we did issue turkey tags for that grower, but no turkeys were taken. So by law, we're required to reimburse for bear damage in New Hampshire. So it's something that we do. It's a lot of our time, but similar to the depredation permit program, there is a requirement to be somewhat commercial. So we do want people to be able to show that they're making at least $1,000 off of qualifying products. And so that tends to be, livestock, certain crops, and then, bees are probably the other big one, so people selling honey. And then the claimed loss has to be at least $250. So what these two things together essentially mean is that we're not reimbursing people for every chicken that's killed in a coop or something like that. We're not issuing, damage for a trash can that's damaged by a bear or something like that. This tends to be people who are making money off some kind of agricultural product and they saw a significant loss. And then obviously we have to show that it was actually done by a bear. So usually that's me going out to a property and looking at the damage and trying to determine if it was a bear. Luckily, bears are not very subtle animals, so when they do damage, we tend to have some pretty obvious signs that it was a bear. But other staff members can also go out and, investigate that or look at pictures and things like that. Again, just to kind of give you guys an idea, last year we gave out almost $35,000 worth of payment for damage. The vast majority of that was cornfields. So one of the biggest issues we see is silage corn. Bears tend to get into that and can cause quite a bit of damage. So this picture is an example of just a flattened patch of silage corn that a bear did. One kind of unique thing about last year is we didn't have any damage to beehives. And so far, knock on wood, this year we also haven't had any reported damage to beehives. So I'd like to think that's a good sign for our education on electric fencing. Every time we go out to damage to a beehive, we do emphasize that electric fencing is necessary, and we can actually require that in order for them to request compensation in the future. So, I think that's how we get a lot of our education out there. People have an issue to their beehive, we show them how to set up an electric fence. So I'd like to think that's a good sign of that, and hopefully that continues forward. So last year was a pretty typical year, maybe a little low, but this can fluctuate quite a bit. So you can see 2024, this chart shows payments over the last 3 years, was a really high year. So we saw quite a bit of bear damage to corn that year. It was more so than we usually see. And these are, that's probably dependent on food availability, things like that. And I think also a little bit on farmers' willingness to accept certain losses, depending on other factors that are going on that year. But, without a doubt, we definitely saw really high bear damage to crops that year. So that one was a bit of a spike. But in general, it can fluctuate, but last year was fairly typical. So I want to touch quickly on one cool thing that we've been doing the last few years. It's pretty recent. So we've been using a drone to measure certain parts of bear damage. Not to get too into the details, but there's a certain way that some farmers harvest corn that we need to measure the damage while it's standing, which is really difficult. So just to give you an idea, if you can see that little green dot in the middle of that big damage patch is my measurement wheel. So you can kind of get an idea of the scale of some of these damage patches and why it may be difficult to go through a 40-acre cornfield and measure patches while the corn's standing. It's just not efficient to try to find every one of those patches and run transects through it. So luckily we were able to find a better solution. So USDA Wildlife Services has a drone, and they have drone pilots, and they were willing to work with me to try to get some drones over these fields. So 2 years ago was our first test to see if this was going to be a viable way to measure some of this damage, and we had a lot of success. So it's going to be a little bit hard to see on this screen, but to the left is a video of yeah, I can't really see it, but it's the drone. It's high up in the air. It's actually doing one of the transects over the cornfield. And then this is the drone we started using, just coming in for a landing. So yeah, it's cute, a little nice little unit there. And they have these really nice cameras on them, so we can get really accurate pictures for mapping. Yeah. So this is a video that shows a little bit about what the drone is doing. So you can see that we can set the height, the frequency of photos, and then it goes on an app, and then it goes through and actually just takes photos every so often. And then we can stitch those photos together using a computer program into a map. So this is a big grain corn field in Bath. You can see all those little flat dots there, those kind of lighter patches are all bear damage patches. So using the drone, we can make this map and then use a program to go through and actually use the computer to measure the area of these patches. So I think this is a really good tool for us. I think it's more accurate to be able to measure these patches on a computer program than it is to have one person out there with a Gandy wheel trying to measure these by hand. So, and it also gives the farmers a good idea of what's happening in their fields. So overall, I think for our department, this is, where things should probably be going. And I also think that for farmers, it's beneficial for them because they're getting more accurate numbers and they're actually getting, like a very accurate representation of the damage that's occurring out there. And then just to end, I want to talk a little bit about how we stack up to other states in the area. So most states have something similar to New Hampshire, where if an animal's causing damage to a crop, there's some kind of program, whether it's just by killing the animal and reporting it or getting some kind of permits. But I think, based off my understanding of these other programs, we have a pretty well organized one with our tags, being able to give those out, having our thresholds for damage. So our deer damage program, I think, is pretty robust compared to other states. We're also the only other state in New England that does compensation for bear damage. So, I think it's important to look at that when we're compensating, when we're dealing with these farmers, is that, we are able to offer something which is good. And, the goal of that is to increase, I guess, just make people more comfortable with wildlife on the landscape, increase the tolerance a little bit of living with bears, that at least, we can try to give something back. And, that allows them to then purchase more feed corn as they're moving forward, and make up for some of those losses. And it's not, we also really try to encourage other methods of deterrence and mitigation with that compensation, but certainly it's something in the toolbox that I think also makes farmers a little bit more willing to implement some of those other methods. So does anyone have any questions? That was kind of a brief overview, but if anyone wants to get into some more details.
Thank you for the presentation. You referred to if a farmer got his 2 tags but was not comfortable hunting. Did I understand he could have an agent?
Yep.
And the agent has to notify you, or does he, just because he's got a hunting license, he's okay to be an agent?
Yeah, so everyone who gets one of these permits, they get basically a packet. So it has a cover letter, it has however many tags they were issued, and it has a copy of the rules. So any agent, so they have to just be a licensed New Hampshire hunter and not have any violations, can act as an agent for a commercial grower. So the commercial grower gets the permit's in their name. They can then give that cover letter and the tags to an agent who can hunt for them on their time. So we get a report card back from every deer that's shot that has all the information on it, and they have to send that in. So once they kill a deer, the commercial grower has to sign off on it. Whoever the agent was needs to sign off on that. They need to fill out all the information on the deer, and we get that back. So we do have an idea of how many of these tags are being used and what kind of deer are being taken on them.
Thank you.
Can
Go ahead, John.
just to be clear, because when Bruce asked the question, it got me thinking about this, so forgive me. But to qualify as an agent, if I'm a licensed hunter and the farmer down the river needs somebody to take a deer or 2 and has the permit for that, he could utilize my tag, my license, all right, as being a legal hunter, or his 2 favorite cousins, okay, right? I mean, as long as they're a licensed individual,
Yep.
is that correct?
Yep. And they have their own sets of, like I said, we make sure everyone has a copy of the rules. And whenever I go out to a new farmer in the program, I always do a site visit and talk to them. Ideally, I try to talk to some of the people they may be using as agents as well to explain the rules. But yeah, any licensed hunter can act as an agent.
Yep. Any other commissioners? Dave?
My understanding, though, the agent's only used at the last resort, though, correct?
So, yeah, we do try to, it's kind of in combination with other things. We do try to have people use non-lethals, use hazing and other deterrents, but yeah, the permits are part of that.
Oh, so they do non-lethal stuff sometimes?
Yeah, often that's what we're
okay.
trying to do. Yeah, the permits, the way we try to view them, they're a tool in the tool belt. So there's something that can help if you have hunters out there putting pressure on that land. They can help change behavior. Obviously getting 2 deer tags is not gonna get rid of every deer for a farm. That's, a farm on the seacoast, 2 deer is not gonna make a huge difference for their farm. But having people out there putting that pressure on, combining that with other methods, other noisemakers, repellents, things like that, can be helpful.
Go ahead.
Does that include pest control people?
Yeah, so that would be a little bit of a separate thing, but yeah, often a lot of them are also using wildlife control operators and things like that for other wildlife issues they may be having.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sure.
I just wanted to add, excellent job, Kat. Thank you very much. The program that she's been managing and I guess, overseeing it's growing. It started out pretty small. It's still pretty small. We could do much more if we had more funding. But I will say that they've done a great job with what we do have to really get out there and work with these landowners and the people who are experiencing conflict issues. Human presence is a huge factor in this, and when you're trying to mitigate damage. And you know, I think the fact that we can utilize hunters even just for the human presence component is a really good complement to some of these tools. I did want to mention the Bear Wise campaign. That's an Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies approved program, so it's nationwide, and we've partaken into that. You'll probably see a lot more related to that Bear Wise campaign over the next few years. But yeah, so I think those things are really important. I also wanted to give you a minute to introduce some of the folks that work with you, so that the commissioners can meet them.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have a couple folks here.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm sure people talked to Dan Bailey before, but Dan Bailey's a bear biologist, so we work really closely together because obviously bears, like we were talking about, are a pretty big source of conflict. And then we have Alex, who's one of our seasonal bear technicians. So they're really, our bear technicians we rely on quite a bit this time of year. They're our rock stars out there. They're taking these calls, you know, the first sets of calls. People on the ground, they're going all over their regions to do really good work. So they're really important to our program. We couldn't do it without them, so really appreciate them.
Thanks,
I
Kat.
have a question.
Jim?
How do you, or what's the process you use to verify a grower's gross income?
Sure. So we have a list of documents in our rules that we can accept. So we are looking at, you know, tax documents and things like that often to make the determination. And then, like I said, I go out to a farm before they take part in the program and just talk to them, look at their documentation, if you know what they can show me, and then, you know, oftentimes these are pretty large farms in the state that we can see what they have for a store or a stand or something like that. So yeah, it's you know, we're not giving these permits to people, you know, in their gardens or things like that. We are verifying that they do meet the commercial grower status.
Thank you.
John?
Forgive me, but I have to ask this because it gets me to thinking.
Sure.
To engage the Greater Wildlife Division, the Dans and Andy, where there is repetitive history of bear damage, let's just talk about the bears. How does that affect discussions you might have on releasing bears from Ben's rehab facility? Are you cognizant of that? And if there's a problem in a certain part of Grafton County where bears are rolling in the corn and destroying it, that you try to, and I understand bears are pretty mobile, okay, do you try to not release bears in that immediate area? I'm just curious about the crossover in the discussion.
Yeah, so Dan Bergeron, Chief of the Wildlife Division. So yeah, we've been working with the Killing Bear Center for years, rehabilitating orphan cubs. The thing to remember about those bears is those are bears that were orphaned as cubs that have no history of conflict or anything, and every bear that gets released from that facility gets an ear tag. And we've done some research projects with collared bears. They do not show up in conflict situations, and certainly I would say less so than you know, your wild bears. I say wild bears, these are wild bears, but bears that haven't run through this program. So we don't see those bears showing up in conflict situations in any area of the state, let alone the areas they're released. It depends on how many bears we have in a given year. Sometimes, you know, if there's not very many, they're all released kind of in the northern part of the state. If we have a higher volume of rehab bears, they're kind of released throughout the state. But they do not stay put from where you release them. We're looking to release them in an area that has appropriate habitat and is far away from things like farms and development and roads, because we know these bears are going to move. They show up in the harvest in our state. They show up in the harvest in Canada sometimes. So we know these bears are surviving and moving around. The one place they're really not showing up is in conflict situations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, John. Chris?
So this is a long question, so I preface it by saying that. But I'm interested in, you've got partner agencies that you work with, feds, et cetera. Can you just sketch out for us how that relationship has changed in recent years, what each agency's sort of unique role is, where you overlap, where you don't overlap? So I'm thinking, the reason for my question is that I have not had recent experience with the program, but perhaps 10 years ago, it seemed like it was mostly the responsibility of USDA and that aid, Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA. And is that changing? Is more of the responsibility falling on Fish and Game? How is that evolving?
Yeah, I mean, so to be honest with you, I am really not sure too much about the early history of the program. I can really just speak most confidently about my time here for the last few years. But I would say, I think one thing is that USDA does tend to be visible. They have a bear tick in the North Country. They're doing a lot of the work, specifically a lot of trapping and direct control work, where it comes to actually, trapping different kinds of animals and things like that, beavers, wood chucks. They do a lot of that kind of conflict work. Whereas, we tend to, my main focus, even though it covers everything, tends to be deer and bear. And those are the programs that Fish and Game is responsible for. So the compensation and the deer damage programs are Fish and Game. So, I think it's a split where we do tend to help each other. So I think those lines can get a little bit muddied sometimes. I know that I can rely on them if I need help, someone to go set up a fence or something like that. And conversely, I'll go out and help them with some of the other efforts they're doing in trapping and things like that. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if someone else can answer a little bit better about how it's evolved over time. But I know that, depending on the season, what kind of work we're doing, we generally overlap really heavily in what we're doing.
Yeah, Dan Berger again, Chief of Wildlife Division. It's been pretty consistent. I'd say over certainly the last 15 to 20 years, it's been pretty consistent. There's been small fluctuations, and largely that's, funding related things. USDA's funding being federally appropriated can fluctuate quite a bit, so whether or not they're, financially able to hire a bear tech might change from year to year. We did add an additional bear technician in 2023, and in large part that was to take some of the pressure off of the bear biologist at the time. So we did hire an additional technician for the program, but that was really just kind of so that one person wasn't just getting run ragged. I think the overall workload, our staff typically are responding to the majority of bear-human conflicts, or I'd like to say human-bear conflicts. And same, like Kat had mentioned, deer, turkeys, those things. One of the things Wildlife Services does a lot of, which is hugely helpful to the department, are some of the more kind of basic technical assistance calls. So, I've got geese on my property, I've got turkeys, where you can just offer them some advice or some, they help with loan programs for pyrotechnics and things like that as well. Some of these mitigation, these non-lethal mitigation techniques. But by and large, the roles have been pretty similar for the past few years, past 10, 15 years or so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that the relationships between the state and the USDA departments really vary across states. The USDA often works with the state agency to complement the services and not necessarily supplement, but complement them. And in this case, we have a small agency, they have a small department, so we were working very closely hand in hand. In some other states, there may actually be a division, like USDA handles these calls and Fish and Wildlife handles those calls. So it does vary across the nation. And with the recent changes at the federal level, many of the states have noticed an increase in work on the state, but we had already had that sort of hand in hand. So I don't know that we've noticed an increase other than we did notice that fluctuation in their ability to hire technicians. And so that was adjusted for prior to even the current arena. So right now I think we have a pretty good working relationship in that we're complementing each other. Could we do more? Certainly. If both agencies had more funding, we could do a lot more together. But we haven't been so to speak, dumped on, like some of the other state agencies have sort of felt all of a sudden they had this workload that they didn't anticipate. That hasn't happened here.
Yeah, one other thing I'll just point out that's a little bit outside of the damage program is, the other thing that USDA assists us with is disease surveillance.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to.
So there's a disease biologist at USDA, so when we had the avian influenza outbreak a few years ago, we had a pretty large die-off of Canada geese. Their staff helped collect those, get testing sent out for us. We do annual surveillance for avian influenza in the state when we do our annual waterfowl captures. They have a staff member that assists us with CWD surveillance, so that's another component that's kind of outside of the damage portion. And the agreement between us and USDA, there's no money changes hands. It's really just staff assistance with things. So we don't pay them anything; they don't pay us anything. We just have this cooperative relationship.
And to that point, that's a very important part of our relationship with them, because we do not have a vet on staff, and we rely on either the state vet, but we rely on their ability to do some surveillance work for us and provide that material to us and to the state vet.
Any other questions from commissioners? I have one question. On the education front, are we encouraging the use of working dogs for livestock mitigation?
Yeah, so that's very successful. So we've seen farms implement that and have their conflict go down quite a bit. Obviously, it can be a bit of a tough sell because of the investment and the costs associated with, those are working dogs and feeding them and things like that. But it is something that I often ask if that's something they're willing to do or looking into, because for livestock, it's very effective. Yeah, absolutely.
And herding dogs are good for geese
Yeah.
as well.
Oh, interesting.
And it tends, it can help in situations where it may not be feasible to electric fence, a huge area or something like that, but whereas a dog can be in with those animals, and, it can definitely be a tool that's good to use. And a lot of farms are using it with success.
Just look out west.
Yeah,
It works.
No, I know
It
people
works.
out west that do it. That's why I was curious.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, we have a couple here too. Yeah.
Any other questions from the commission? Not seeing any. Thank you.
All right, thank
Great
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Committee reports. So I believe legislative, does any other committees other than legislative have something today? Does public, you're fine, right? Public engagement, you don't have anything for committee reports?
Just about the meetings that I went to. that's
All right, if you want to start with that for committee reports.
Okay, last week I attended the Rough Grouse Society meeting in the local chapter, and basically they were just making comments over the funds that were being delivered to the Fish and Game, and there was, in the future, there's going to be a presentation that they're going to present to the Fish and Game, and they're all excited and they're happy to be involved with that. The other thing, next week, Jim, myself, and I think you are, AJ, we're going to the Hampton Conservation Committee, and we're meeting with that group in regards to what's happening in those local areas. And they want to kind of get an idea of what the Fish and Game can do to help their issues, along with inciting us with the issues that they have. And then in September 22nd, there is another meeting, which unfortunately I won't be able to make, but it's the Coastal Committee. And I think Jim said he was going to attend. And so they invited us to that, and it's another group that's going to talk in regards to what's happening on the coast and such. So we're starting to get some public notice with conservation groups, and we're moving forward. I know Pat went to, last Saturday there was a shoot for the Timber Association, and they did it for youth, and he was in attendance for that, and I believe he said there were like 80 people, and they were quite surprised that somebody from the commission showed up. So they were really enthusiastic about that, and he got to meet and greet people and to talk to them about the commission. So that was pretty good. But that's pretty much it for me.
Cool. Any questions for Dave on public engagement? Not seeing any. The Legislative Committee, we did have a change. Commissioner Stoll stepped down from being chair of the Legislative Committee, and now Commissioner McGonigal is chairman of that committee, and he named Commissioner Poole as vice chair. We did go over, which you guys received an email about the verbiage to put legislation forward about fisheries rules. So given that, Commissioner Poole, if you don't mind stepping up, because you've been carrying a lot of water on this one, so.
Okay, so I think the only thing I would say in prefacing this is I think this is a two-part effort. Commissioner Stoll brought a recommendation to our meeting, the Legislative Committee meeting, and I believe that the chair's pursuing at least part of that with the AG's.
I'll give an update.
You are going to do that, okay. So this is not meant to be a complete report on that meeting. This is just what the decision finally was made as far as going forward with the legislative effort. So the final, after quite a bit of discussion, the final vote was, and you all received this. I'll actually read it just to put it into the minutes. But so the final vote was to make reference to to be inserted in a new subparagraph of RSA 206:4-A. Whenever reference is made to in the revised statutes annotated or in any other state statute giving the executive director the authority to adopt rules that would affect freshwater fish management, it shall be construed to mean with the approval of the commission. We make this recommendation, and that's the end of the actual verbiage of that recommendation. We make this recommendation understanding that this is going to be the beginning of a process, legislative process, that will certainly result in adaptation of this recommendation from the commission. But we felt that it was important that the whole commission agree to that particular wording. And the only other comment would be that we recognize, and we were fortunate to have staff at this meeting that helped us with definitions and things that we may run into for issues. One of the issues that we may run into here is that this specifically says freshwater, and the reason we did that is that we became aware of the fact that we already have authority for saltwater species. So that is in part of that, what was in that packet that I sent to all the commission members. However, we do not believe that a definition of freshwater versus saltwater fish species exists in law. So that may be something that needs to be worked out, or certainly would have to be something to be worked out to clarify what we're doing, or what we're suggesting. Other than that, without getting into the nitty-gritty of all the discussion, I think part of it you're going to take care of. I think that's, so my motion is that the commission agreed to move forward once the election cycle is complete, to move forward with legislators to introduce this legislation to move this down.
Are you sure you want to make it until the legislative cycle is complete? Because you might be able to get work done with people beforehand too. I'm just saying, don't limit yourself.
Okay. I guess I'll limit my motion to the words that I said.
So
Whenever reference is made, that verbiage, that you all received it.
Can you repeat your actual motion, because I'm
Sure.
having difficulty?
Whenever,
How about you give it
This-
to me in writing?
Yeah, that's it.
be glad to do that.
So just to clarify, his motion is that we approve the language that the legislative committee came up with to move forward to now find legislators to potentially introduce this legislation. That's his motion.
That is.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Bruce, seconded. All right, questions?
Dave, could you take just a few minutes and explain to the rest of the commission and obviously the viewing public some of the background about why this was developed?
So the original, my motion, originally was in the May 19th meeting, was to direct legislative committee to develop a proposal that gives the commission authority over fish rules and report back to the July commission meeting, which we postponed that. And then it was seconded and voted unanimously. So this language, we struggled with a number of different issues, beginning with the breadth of the discussion, the breadth of the authority that we would seek, and significantly where it would be most succinctly put. Where in the RSA we would accomplish our goal without, we ran into a lot of issues with specific species being discussed, with specific areas being limited to wildlife or to fisheries. But we felt that if it was put in the duties section, that it would be succinctly in there. So somebody wouldn't have to go to a fisheries section or to a wildlife section or to some other section to find that discussion, that language. Other than that, I'm trying to avoid getting into what the chair is going to discuss because there's a whole other section of this that Grisha Stoll brought up about whether do we have this authority already. So that's a whole other discussion that I am not trying to present here. I think that that's going to be handled between I think that the chair is already working with the AG on that. So I'm not sure that, I don't feel that I want to get involved in that right now. If there's more to it, I'll be glad to add to it, but I think that can be discussed with the chair. Did that help?
Yeah, so it sounds like what we're doing here is codifying our authority in the
Fisheries,
Freshwater.
specifically fisheries. Yes.
Go ahead, John. I think John had a question.
Oh, sorry.
And it's your job to reel me in, because as Eric would tell you, you ask me the time, I'm going to tell you how to build the clock. I can't help myself.
That's all right.
And the colonel can understand me. So my question is this, because I've been around the commission long enough to know that this very thing has been discussed before, and there's definitely a school that says, why are we talking about this? We have this authority. And there are a few members of the class who say, well, we're not so sure that you do. And there have been kind of some positions taken on that, and it's never been really forced, okay? And I know that Eric did a lot of work on this, and others have done a lot of work on reviewing this. And the most interesting thing you can do is go and ask two separate attorneys about this, and then you start a real good time, okay? So what I'm most interested in is if this is going to move forward, okay, through the legislative process, and a sponsor of this is going to be sought, all right, is in fact, I want to be sure I understand this, is the commission going to lead this legislative process, not New Hampshire Fish and Game as the department? Do I understand that? we own this if we do this.
Absolutely.
We do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is what we're supposed to do, be responsible for the legislative things that go forward, or we approve to go forward. So I wanted to be very clear on that. And forgive me, but I did read all of this several times, and I just want to be certain that this very first thing we have talked about here, okay, is all we're talking about right now, not the rest of the 2 pages. Is that correct?
We're talking specifically about the fisheries.
About the fisheries,
freshwater
which is in the first 3 paragraphs.
Correct, yeah.
That's it for
Yeah.
this discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There is
That's-
more to add on to based on other things that we'll clarify in a minute here, but
Okay.
that you brought up.
All right, well, because if you read all of this, you go from seeing the word approval to you seeing the word consultation, and then that's what causes all the discussion.
Yes.
So-
Yes. And the reason there's that full package of all that is because the committee struggled with that very thing of where language used, what actually exists right now around freshwater fisheries, all that stuff, hence how we landed on this item. And to address your earlier question about the 2 paths, the current approach is that we're taking both paths.
Which I'm not now
So you
clear.
asked about 2 paths, the idea that we already have the authority,
Yeah.
and the idea that we're trying to create legislation to create the authority. We're walking down both paths. We're actively working with the AG's office to try to confirm that we have said authority, but also the one thing that I've tried to stress is I don't want to waste time, so hence move legislation forward regardless. So both paths are going forward at the same time. On the front of Eric's question about whether or not we hold all approval authority around rulemaking, the big request has been to get a written response from the AG's office. So the day after the legislative meeting, I scanned all of Eric's documents, which, Eric, are you giving out copies of those documents today? Are you giving copies of those documents out to the other members today?
I have.
Okay, cool. So those documents, I scanned them all in, sent them to the AG's office, to 2 of the gentlemen over there that we work with, followed up on a phone call to confirm that we were going to get an actual written response. Then this morning, because I haven't gotten it yet, then this morning I followed up again and confirmed that we are in fact going to get a written response on that. What we do with that information when we get it, we're going to come together as a commission and decide that. But we are actively pursuing getting a written response on whether or not we have those abilities in the first place. So in the meantime, the legislative committee is actively working to push this legislation forward to make it at least explicit and hopefully get it done in this legislative cycle. Go ahead, John.
So, are we a little bit ahead of ourselves, though, by doing this today? Are we a little ahead of ourselves?
I would worry that if we turn out to not be ahead of ourselves, then we're behind. I'd rather us pull back, being ahead of ourselves than us just be behind, because I've been on this commission 5 years now. And we've been talking about this since the first time I walked in this door, and I'm sure it's true for every other commissioner that's been here longer than me. Hence, we're going to push that legislation forward regardless, as we wait on this other thing. And there's some concern from some of the commissions that the AG's office is not going to give us that written response. I'm confident we're going to get it, and I'm going to keep pushing for it. But until we see it, this is where we're at. Hence why we're pushing the legislation forward.
So question, because the total confusion factor is working here. But if the AG comes back and says we do, are we just stopping the legislative work at that point?
I don't see why not. I mean, that would take a commission vote, obviously, because there's intent of the commission, but I don't see why we couldn't.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to get a clarification.
Go ahead.
So my comment would be, if the AG came back and said that we already have that authority, there are, I didn't count all of the pieces in your legislation from a few years ago, Representative, but I believe there are about 128 portions of RSA that are inaccurate.
That are what?
that would have to be changed.
Oh,
So,
yes,
So the question is about fisheries rules, correct?
Well, the bigger
So-
question that Eric Stoll has asked, Commissioner Stoll and some of the other commissioners, is if we are supposed to consent for all rulemaking based on the legislation the way it's written.
Okay,
That's the
That's the-
outstanding question.
okay, that's not how I interpreted it from the meeting, but okay,
Yes.
if that's what it is.
That's the ongoing outstanding question that predates you, predates me.
It predates
Probably
me.
predates Commissioner Stoll too. In fact, I've recently looked into newspaper articles at the early 1900s about this very debate going on between.
So basically,
with the
we're talking
commission.
about all rules.
Only when it comes to the question asked to the Attorney General's office.
But you're basically saying all rules in this book, under Fish and Game, the question is whether or not the commission has the full authority over
Correct.
every single rule in this book.
Correct. That's the question. of
okay.
The AG's office. Correct. Which they've given us a verbal consultation on it.
Yeah.
Since I've been here, but we're looking for a written response on that. And then the legislation process is specifically around freshwater fisheries, which obviously you were present for. Is there any other questions on this? This is obviously a lot of information.
AJ, so if we move forward with the fisheries, is the next thing out of the legislative committee going to talk about hunting rules and regulations?
I mean, that's
Or
up to
when
the
the
commission.
Attorney General comes back and says, you do have authority, maybe this becomes a moot point, but anyway, it looks to me like we're pigeonholing fisheries, when as a commission, we, correct me if I'm wrong, but we really have a policy and procedures in place, and I guess maybe fisheries needs to be tightened up, or hunting needs, I'm just wondering where we're going with this.
Well, I think that those decisions are for the commission as we move on. I think this decision right here around the fisheries was a bit of a strategy. If we go out and try to legislate for what is 100 and something laws where this is mentioned, the chances of us getting something through are far less. If all that's attached, one item could kill everything. This idea is we're biting off a smaller piece of the pie so that we can chew it and see where we land. If the commission so chooses to move forward on these things, that's just up to the commission. If we decide we're going to move on to, let's say, coyote rules, which we don't have authority over, then that's the, whatever it might be. That's, so obviously this commission has the power to say, hey, we're going to pursue a legislative solution to this. That's inherently one of our powers, is to pursue those things. Go ahead, Tran.
God, I mean, man, you're just throwing more monkey wrenches in here. There's confusion factor here. He's going after fishery.
Which was a vote of this, to be clear,
That's
this
it.
was a vote of all of us voted on this.
This is a unanimous vote.
I
This isn't just-
understand this, but
yeah,
I'm
this
just trying to
wasn't
get
just
some
out on a whim.
clarification here, because
Yeah.
I question what Bruce is saying. Why aren't we, if there's a question on the authority side of things, then why aren't we going for all of the bundle?
Yeah, and there has been
Okay.
discussion on this.
With fishery and hunting. I mean, that's, to me, makes sense. But
Go ahead. He's the man.
Dave.
You're the man, so go
I'm
ahead.
not-
I'll wait.
You're vice chair.
I
I'll
spent
make
some
chair
serious
now.
time with it, but, so, I guess I don't want to try to oversimplify it or undersimplify it, but we, in just doing fisheries, we realized, after all of the research has been done, we already had the authority. 2 weeks ago, we realized we already have the authority. And bear in mind, I want to make sure that everybody here understands, nothing here, it's not like this motion is trying to take authority for making the rules. It's consent authority, with the commission's consent, or approval, actually, is the word we're using. So there's something different between taking over the rules process and taking over and asserting approval authority within that process. How was that?
Yes.
I understood that.
That was good clarification.
And I say that because it's very specific, how rules are developed, how they're, you know, both in RSA and I believe within the department. So it's that we are seeking within this motion to have consent authority, approval authority. Sorry, I keep using those two words. We've used those two words both in law and within the department, kind of back and forth, but approval authority over rules that would be proposed by the department. So that's the first thing I want to make sure that everybody understands. We're not trying to change, other than that's this approval authority, change the process of establishing rules.
But
Did
you're
that help?
defining it in one factor though. Fishery.
Yep.
And the reason.
I mean, I'm just,
The reason
where
we
I'm lost
do-
in this part of this. This is the thing that doesn't make sense to me.
So
I can tell you
so,
what-
So here's the clarity. Fisheries doesn't have 100 RSAs that specifically specify the commission or the director back and forth. When you get to the wildlife side, it is incredibly detailed, and it goes, in a lot of cases, species by species. And so point being, with the freshwater fishery side, you can simply, or at least we hope, do it in one act under one part that would not have a profound influence across all laws. If we start pursuing wildlife, now you are talking about hundreds of RSAs.
If I may.
Go ahead.
This book is not just wildlife or fisheries. This book is operation. This book is the operation of this agency. It includes permits, it includes, you know, what do we want to charge for a fee? I mean, it is more than just wildlife and fisheries. It's a lot deeper than just wildlife and fisheries.
Absolutely.
So when you're talking about this book and all the laws, you're talking about the entire operation of this agency.
And to clarify that, we had this discussion just around the fisheries alone, is wording on that. Do we want to sit here and start approving, seaweed rules? No, that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in angling, hunting, trapping. That's why this commission exists. So point being, there was a lot of discussion on the clarity of what to pursue, even on this fisheries thing when we went about doing it. And again, this is a follow-up to follow through with a motion that this commission made back in July. John.
I don't know how we can not beat this to death, but I'm
That's
not
fine.
trying to, okay? But my point is, yes, and I voted in favor of us taking this up for consideration. But what's a little troubling now is, I think we have all learned at some point in time, you start moving down two paths, you're gonna end up in trouble, probably on both of them. So all I'm suggesting is, where we're at today and this here, all right, I'm in favor of the fact we got here. But now, you're waiting from word across town. If you can get someone over there to decide on whether we do or we don't, then this, this is just exercise, okay? So, trust me, I am not a fan of kicking the can down the road, okay? But is today really the day that we do this? I'm not sure. I don't think it is, AJ. I'm really trying to understand this. I'm in favor of this, Dave. I'm in favor of this, okay? But I'm not convinced today is the day that, you know, after today we go looking for a rep somewhere to sponsor something, okay? To clarify this. I'm just not there, and
I guess my question would be, because I know you were there, and there are some newer commissioners that weren't present. When Commissioner Stoll asked this question, at least the last time it was asked, I was on this commission and sat in that room with the AG's office, and they told us we did not have the authority over all that. So my point being is, what I'm asking for now is or written to Commissioner Stolzley. We need that in writing. If that's what you're saying, we don't have this authority. We need that in writing and confirmed by the AG's office. So I'm not hopeful that the AG's office is going to send me a piece of paper that suddenly says that we have the approval authority over all rules. Hence why I'm a firm believer that we move that forward.
Okay, comment.
Yes.
And I'm going to be a little pointed about this, but I think we have to be. The AG that was asked that question, who was he actually counsel for? The commission or New Hampshire Fish and Game? Because there is more than one. So that's the important thing, in my opinion, is who that answered that question, who was he legally representing the position of? New Hampshire Fish and Game, this agency, or the commission. And that's why we have an attorney that's been assigned to us, okay? All right? So,
That was Attorney General Haslam, who was representing the department at the time.
exactly, that's my memory, thank you for that. So,
Right. And we're
with all due respect,
a response from Mark Lucas for this.
so,
I understand what you're saying, but I think, again, I'm personally, and again, nothing's stopping anybody from voting against the motion or whatever else. I think we should keep moving forward with legislation. We can pull back on legislation at any point we want. But I've been here for 5 years. When I first walked in this door, I heard every commissioner, that's been here for a minute talking about fisheries rules. Here we are 5 years later. Let's move the.
well, maybe the public or people may not think so, but this commission always has a lot on its plate.
It does. of
Okay,
course,
it
yeah.
has a lot on
Yeah.
its plate. So, and I think it has an important job,
Right.
so.
Director.
For my clarification, because I wasn't here when this all started, my understanding, and am I wrong or am I right here, that AG Aslan represented both the commission and the department
Yes.
Correct.
during that time frame?
Yep.
And then it was after that then
Lucas.
came in to represent the commission, and we had separate AG representation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the original, when the question was originally asked, Commissioner Stoll asked for a written response to the question.
Yeah, I just found that out.
To both the
at
director
legislative
and
meeting.
to the AG's office, and no response ever came.
Yeah.
So this is
And I wasn't aware of
predates you.
that. I wasn't aware of that
Yes.
until the meeting we had.
Again, a lot of this discussion predates me and many of the commissioners sitting in this room.
Right.
So,
That's why I was just trying to get
Yeah.
clarification, so I have a better understanding of the history that you all have experienced.
so to clarify where we're, go ahead, Chris.
I just, I want to add just one thing. And I add this not because I have an interest in prejudicing a vote one way or the other, but the question was asked about whether we have the time to wait on this until the September meeting, whether there's some part of the legislative process that will occur in the very near term that'll limit our ability to pursue legislation if we can find a sponsor. And I just want to make it clear to everybody that there's an opportunity for a senator and a representative to file legislation well into and after the November election. So there is a window that opens. Representative, help me out if you happen to know, but in the House it opens in early September. It'll close prior to the election for incumbents, and then it'll reopen for incumbents and everyone who is elected in November. And the Senate has a more open process that'll run through roughly Thanksgiving. And Melissa, I don't know if you have specific knowledge, but my point is that if you're concerned that we need to vote today so that we can pursue a legislator to be the sponsor, there is a lot of time to do that. Now, it may take a while to do it. Maybe starting now makes sense. Like I said, I'm not trying to prejudice anybody's vote, but there is a lot of time between now and when the window closes for a LSR, which is the first piece of the process to get filed. And then the bill is going to go to legislative services anyway, and they're going to craft the exact language based on what the legislator says they want to accomplish. So my other point is, if you're uncomfortable with a particular word or phrase, but are supportive of the concept, that's going to get fleshed out anyway when legislative services actually drafts a bill. And they're going to look at the current statute, and they're going to advise this would-be sponsor whether or not they think this legislation is necessary, whether or not it's already covered, what other parts of law need to be amended. So there's a lot to this. You don't have to get it right today to move the ball forward to achieve what is the collective opinion of the commission. So I want to make that point for everybody.
And if you selected a particular legislator right now, they may not even get reelected. So,
Exactly. And then, right, if they put in their LSR now, or when the opportunity begins in September and they're not elected, it goes away. It's in the trash pile, so you have to start over anyway.
Representative Harvey.
Yeah, one clarification. The window doesn't open until after the election, so.
Well, there's an incumbent window though for
Yeah.
House members, right? That's
September,
my,
and then another
Right.
one in November.
right. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I felt like maybe there was uncertainty about that, and I just wanted to clarify.
So
that.
timeline, meaning if we're gonna move forward with this, we gotta be done. I would still say by September, well, by October, because I guess we're not gonna know who's elected till after November, regardless. But nevertheless, the motion on the table still is to approve this language and approve pursuing a representative to, or representatives to support it. Either way. Is there any more questions or comments? I know this is a big one, guys.
AJ? Yeah, I just want to try to get it clear in my mind.
Yep.
So the concept here is that we're going to look for legislation that codifies the fact that we have authority over freshwater fishing
Approval.
regulations.
Yeah, approval authority. Correct.
Okay, and I know we have in our handbook a whole list of things where we need consent, approval, and discussion and all that sort of thing. But this is going to make it, if it passes legislation, do that. Does that take away a lot of the expectations and authority we have from the executive director?
Clarify, I don't really understand your question.
Well, I don't know how the other commissioners feel, there's 11 of us, but I'm a little concerned about us getting in the minutia of, rather than policy, getting down in the minutia of when trout season is going to start. Or are we going to get down in the minutia as to which ponds ought to be open year-round for ice fishing and everything else versus exclusively trout ponds? I'm kind of trying to figure out what's really driving this mechanism. What's wrong with what we're trying to tweak?
I think commissioners are looking for the ability to approve, which is not to take control of the full process. That process would be like we do on the wildlife side, or let's say deer. Biologists are setting those 10-year plans. They have different indexes that are monitoring. They come to us with a recommendation, and then we approve said recommendation. Obviously, there's the whole rulemaking process that goes along. This is the same thing that this is looking to do, is now, if trout seasons, whatever they might be, we go through the process, but ultimately the commission needs to put its stamp of approval on said thing. That's just for clarity. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Obviously, the commissioners got their belief on that, but I'm just saying that that is what this is looking for.
Yeah, I was just trying to make sure I understood the driver.
Yes. Any other commissioners? Wow, this was much more than I expected on this one, I'm not gonna lie. So the motion on the table is to approve the language that Commissioner Poole read out loud and to pursue legislators to take up said potential LSR. Not seeing any more questions. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Let's just, sorry guys, let's just do a count. We don't have a secretary here, so I'm gonna do it. Chandler?
Aye.
No.
No.
You got this, Tanya? You going?
Yes.
Stoll? Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So 3 no's, Temple, Cavaney, and Titone. Thank you.
Motion passes. Wow, thank you, everybody. That was a lot.
And excuse me, Commissioner Poole, you'll send me that motion, right?
You bet.
Thank you.
Okay. More committee reports. Seacoast Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to the large whale take reduction plan, the National Marine Fisheries Service is requesting comments from lobster fishery participants as well as others with specialized knowledge on whales to submit comments pertaining to the potential use of ropeless fishing gear or on-demand fishing gear, which would eliminate conventional buoy lines. The information in these comments will be used to recommend modifications or to the large whale take reduction plan, and new regulations are required by Congress to be in place by December 31st, 2028. Comments for this program will be due by October 14th, 2026. And that's what I have this month.
Forgive my ignorance. What is ropeless fishing gear? How does that work?
Well, it's a contrivance where all your rope would be stuffed into a cage or some other kind of device, and you'll either be a timed release mechanism or some kind of electronic device that will be triggered to allow the flotation device to float up to the surface of the water, so you'll be able to retrieve your lobster traps. This way it eliminates the vertical lines, which eliminates the risk to large whales for entanglement.
Interesting. All right. Any other questions for the Seacoast Commissioner? Anything from lakes and from rivers, rather?
No.
Okay.
I have an announcement though on sustainability.
Okay.
Just, there will be a meeting of the Sustainability and Strategic Planning Committee on September 9th at 1:30. You don't need to write it down. I'll send out an email, but we got that locked down just last day or so I thought I'd announce it at this meeting. Thank you.
Cool. All right, no more committee reports. We bumped up the director's report a little rung, so I'm going to pass on to the director.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of items I first want to address before I get into the director's report. We have, since we're talking about rules, we have a marine rule, which I handed out to you all. It's FIS 602.05. It's expiring, FIS 602.05, relative to seining restrictions. It's expiring September 16th, 2026. The initial rule, I guess the initial proposal needs to be filed to prevent the expiration. We're trying to get ahead of this. There's quite a few rules that have expired, and we're trying to get caught up on all those and then prevent rules from expiring before we file for them. The department is not proposing to any changes to this. We're actually proposing to just re-adopt this rule without any amendments. Basically, the rule says seining restrictions: A, seines used for taking of marine species from estuarine and harbor waters of the state shall be not greater than 50 square feet. The mesh size shall be no smaller than a ½ inch. For purposes of this section, harbor waters, in quotes, means any waters of the harbor inland of the most seaward jetty or day marker. and then section B, subsection B says seines shall only be manually drawn, pulled, or dragged through the water. And so this is one of those where we seek consent to proceed with the scheduling of the proposed public hearing, public discussion. We are not proposing any changes to it. We plan to file that request for the fiscal impact statement as soon as we have it back, and we want to file this all before the 16th. So the plan is to present the initial proposal to you today. If you have any concerns, let me know. We will proceed with filing the proposal for the amendment, or no amendments, I should say, to avoid the expiration. Any questions on this? I would like at least to hear from you. Consent is needed for us to move forward. I want to move forward on this so we don't have a rule that expires.
We need to vote on that, right?
Yeah, we can either vote today or you can vote on the 15th, which is the next meeting. I am concerned about the timeline for that, but we do want to move forward with having the public, open public hearing.
Make a motion, we approve.
Commissioner Stoll makes a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded. Any questions or commentary? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? 2 opposed? Trey, and you're opposed too?
No, I
Okay.
wasn't.
Sorry.
I
So
was-
one
I
one
thought he was
opposed.
trying to get your attention.
Yeah, 1 opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will proceed with having the public hearing and moving forward with that. Thank you. The second item I have is the online bow hunter education rules. This is just a consultation. I know that in the past this has been brought up. We are desiring to add an online component only for bow hunting education. And the reason is that it will allow for those who are prohibited from handling firearms, that they could actually get a bow hunting education option and be able to be a bow hunter, a licensed bow hunter, instead of taking the full traditional hunting ed class, which they cannot handle the firearms. The initial proposal has been filed on this one. We did have a public hearing. We are drafting that final proposal at this point. And so I just wanted to at least make you aware of it. If you want, we could forward you the adjustments that we've made to include that online component. I'll email it out to you all if that's okay. Does everybody want a copy? I assume you do.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll email you the copy that includes that online piece. And I just wanted to make you aware of that and ensure that you guys are still on board with the idea. I guess we discussed it in the past. It's finally coming to fruition. It took a while, but it's coming to fruition. So. All right, so with those 2 items out, let's talk about highlights from all the great divisions that we have. So from the inland fisheries, some of the highlights: statewide monitoring advanced with continued species and habitat data collection, historic tournament data entry for trend analysis, and the finalization of that division's operational plan. They're working on some revisions to that. From the brook trout and habitat work, that continues to progress through the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture Surveys, particularly in Sullivan County and Region 1. Plus, they've done some strategic wood addition assessments in the Saco. Partnerships and conservation actions have included work on the Gonick Mills dams removal, Watershed Ecology Institute support we had from that. We've had Stream Crossing Steering Committee participation. We've had eel surveys, the shad truck repair bids. We've had a variety of things going on with partnerships and conservation actions. The Large Lakes operations folks have moved forward with the creel survey planning. We've also done several discussions on the trophy fish program, looking at angler inquiry responses and QA/QC of the 2025 bass tournament data. So we're digging into that finally. Hatchery achievements, you're going to see quite a bit of the new hatchery next month, but our hatchery achievements have included the modernization project progress, which includes disc filters, tank installations, and the finalization of all the cement pads. The Berlin hatchery accounted for stocking of 231,000 fish, plus fish, I should say. Continue doing some facility repairs there. And right now, we're working through what the New Hampton hatchery is going to look like as far as operations for staffing, training, the types of fish, the broodstock aeration upgrades, and a variety of other things to ensure we have a fairly accurate estimate of what that hatchery is going to cost us moving forward. And right now, it's looking well over $1.5 million to run that hatchery. So we'll have more of that input for the Sustainability Committee when we meet next month. Wildlife Division, non-game species recovery is continuing for multi-state listed species, including black racers, Karner blue butterflies, turtles, a variety of other species. We've extended plover nesting season. We've had an extended plover nesting season, which required us extending our ongoing beach coordination in Hampton Beach, and working with our law enforcement division and extending some of that work as well. Our partnerships down there at the beach are advancing. We have regular coordination with both state, municipal, and private stakeholders down there, balancing this piping plover protection and the desire for recreational use in the same areas. It's been a little bit challenging, particularly since things have kind of gotten extended through various reasons. The game program is preparing for the fall 2026 hunting and trapping readiness season, doing data collection protocols and reviewing those. Also gearing up and preparing all the registration materials so that people can register their harvest, doing online system checks, biological check station scheduling, staff training, and getting ready for pheasant stocking as well. We continue to do species data review, particularly for bear, deer, moose, turkey, and fur bearers. Also small game, I don't want to leave them out. Those seasons, many of them are beginning September 1st, and they're going to continue, we'll continue a lot of this work initially into October. The Habitat program continues with land acquisitions and habitat management and stewardship projects. Obviously, they have ongoing efforts that I think daily are hitting your agenda and the GNC agenda. We do have a big event coming up, which I'll talk about a little later. Law Enforcement Division, the K-9 program, secured a major grant for funding, which is great because it's outfitting a new cruiser and supporting future K-9 program needs. I'll just mention again, the K-9 program is run primarily off of donations and grants, so that's a good win for us. We have had several public ceremonies and partnerships, which most recently we did dedicate we had a road dedication for Representative Bean. That was Salt Marsh Pond Access Road. We did have some representatives and senators and several political figures there, and Commissioner McGonigal did join us for that road dedication. We've also had some work at the AMC Mount Washington celebration, which I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. We continue to do the coastal habitat protection for the piping plover, but we also have the new dock that is being installed at the Coast Guard station down at Portsmouth, and that is finally complete and being installed, and we will have a dedication next month on that. Search and rescue ATV response, again, just nonstop work. Several life-saving interventions have been occurring. Several retrievals, unfortunately, for fatalities have occurred as well. So we keep responding to those things. Community and outreach and recruiting is expanding. We did a national night out and old home day events recently through our law enforcement division. K-9 continues to do K-9 demonstrations. That unit is very active. And we continue to participate in the college career days in-state and out-of-state to try to recruit new officers and folks to New Hampshire Fish and Game. Public Affairs rolled out the new Ride New Hampshire bumper sticker. So if you don't have one, make sure you get it. That follows the Hunt New Hampshire, Fish New Hampshire, and Wild New Hampshire as outreach tools. Right now they're partaking in major event preparations for the Hopkinton and Lancaster fairs, and also building up for the fall Becoming an Outdoors Woman fall weekend, which is the September 11th through the 13th. That right now, we have 116 participants registered for that event, so that's pretty exciting. Marine Division and Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, they continue their recreational angler surveys. They've had 75 shoreside and 5 at sea surveys. They continue to do field projects advancing across the aquaculture monitoring sessions. They're doing a lot more work with the lobster and menhaden port sampling work. You may be familiar with that, sir. And then, of course, we're doing some ventless trap sampling and sea sampling as well. The large whale acoustic monitoring program has progressed with retrieval and redeployment of our passive acoustic device in partnership with Soundship LLC. We've also participated in interstate meetings on major regional fisheries issues, particularly with whale conservation and monitoring systems. The Discovery Center visitation reached over 1,000 visitors. We've had public programs like Bay Walk, Bay Venture, Critter Dinner, Low Tide Naturalist. We've engaged over 280 plus participants and continue to support an active volunteer involvement in those programs. Research and stewardship continues with a variety of things. They've got over 100 plus marsh plots out there where they're actually sampling over 100 different sample sites, which is really impressive. We've done internships with the National Symposium, presentations included in those, and we continue to work on statewide tidal marsh assessments. We continue to build our training and community engagement programs by hosting the New Hampshire Coastal Adaptation Work Group. And we also did a roundtable for coastal conservation commissioners. And we're also completing the final rain barrel installation at Flood Ready Neighborhood Projects, which is great. Legal and Legislative Director's Office highlights right to knows. I don't know if there was something with the moon in retrograde or something, but all of a sudden we had an influx of right to knows. Thank you, Melissa, for handling all those. The processing of those continue. We're also looking at improving our own internal processes and how we handle those and trying to be more efficient in those. Rulemaking continues. As I said, we're trying to work through all those expired rules and trying to get ahead of the ones that are coming down to expire. And then we'll be beginning next spring we'll have our multi-year season setting and things like that you all will be engaged in. Federal aid actions, we had 3 funding distribution requests to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've managed to do corrective action updates, and we've done issuance of our recruitment and retention awards, and we have ongoing sub-recipient performance reporting that continues. From the director's desk, I guess I'll add that, as I said before, we had 2 dedications recently, or 2 events recently that we participated in, the Saltmarsh Pond Road dedication, and then AMC's 150th year celebration at Mount Washington. We also recognize Richard Wright, who has 60 years of hunter education instruction with our organization, 60 years. So that was a pretty big event for us. And then the other big event for us was the swearing in of our new conservation officer, Officer Barron. We also continue to work through sustainability and budget planning discussions internally. We're planning to obviously work with the Sustainability Committee and bring forward some of our internal ideas. Participation in this will involve the Legislative Committee as well. Some of you are members of that. And then we'll be looking for probably some support through the Governor's Office, Executive Council, and things like that for a variety of things that we'll be bringing forward. We've had some strategic and operational planning that we've been doing internally, mainly around what I would call fiscal responsibility and or fiscal forecasting, and we'll dig more into that at the Sustainability Committee meeting. We have also had a recent thing that I think you might be interested in. This is outside of our agency, but we have members participating, is the Pesticide Control Board, advanced restrictions on the 2nd generation rodenticides, and the neonicotinoids, and they have limited exemptions on those for like pet, veterinary use, wood destroying pests, and emergency authorizations that are under RSA 430-2. But basically, they have created some draft rules. They've posted those on the Department of Agriculture's website, which is under the Pesticide Control Board website. So if you want to see what those rules are, it's open for public comment now. We did participate in that process with them, but I think that's an important factor for us in how it links to wildlife. On the federal side, we have some federal actions. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies continues to monitor the sport fish restoration and boating trust fund at the Washington, D.C. level. That's HR 6500 and HR 8870, so if you want to look those up. Also, they're monitoring the Farm Bill 2.0. And the reason that these are important, the reason I'm mentioning them, this really affects some core funding stability. It affects the value of state management. It affects our boating and angling communities and the infrastructure, the user pay, the user benefits, those sorts of things. So I at least monitor those. The directors across the nation are monitoring this together with AFWA. Also, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies provided comment letters in response to the Federal Register notices that underscore the central role that states play in fish and wildlife management. And that was supported unanimously through all the directors. We voted to say, yes, let's have a letter sent from the association, National Association. So, as I said, we're preparing for the Sustainability Committee. We're going to continue those internal discussions on fiscal forecasting and planning. The anticipated focus is going to be potential legislative needs, governor's office engagement, fee adjustments, perhaps some new license or stamp concepts that we'll discuss, and perhaps internal operations. With the priorities obviously aligning with the strategic plan that the commission has published. So we'll be aligning all of that. Upcoming events, I did want to let you know a few things. You mentioned, we talked about the Rough Grouse Society with their donation. That's going to be an upcoming event here. We also have the Wildlife Heritage Foundation that is contributing, making a big donation to us, so we'll have an event here. Also, we currently plan to have the dedication of the 1,300 acres that are in Marlow and Alstead, dedicated as the Walski Wildlife Management Area. That is obviously named after our former fish and game biologist, Ted Walski. That is scheduled for September 8th, and then also the New Hampshire Fish and Game Dock dedication will be at Portsmouth Coast Guard Station on September 10th. And that's what I have. Lots of stuff going on. I could go on and on for days, but I won't.
Any questions for the director?
Just a quick one. So the conflicts that you referred to, the extended plover, these are access to the beach issues, crowds get bigger in the summer.
Right, exactly. It's an ongoing thing. There's limited beach, and the plovers are finding their way there, and public obviously want to use it. And so we, oftentimes we don't allow, or we say to DNCR, please don't rake these areas because they're nesting, whatever. So we have these areas roped off. Certain people are appreciative. We get, hey, great job, love what you're doing. You're really, we're so glad to see these birds back. Other people, not so much. They're like, when are you getting rid of these birds? That sort of thing. So it's a constant battle. We play the middleman, the balancing game. That's how I know we're doing everything right. We got everybody commenting from both sides. So, but this year, we did have some storms and some events that did delay some fledging. We did have a couple of other things that kind of extended, I guess, the season. So we can't predict it. We didn't put the birds there. The birds are coming there on their own. I just want to make that clear. So.
Any other questions for the director? Announcement for next month, our normal meeting is going to be at the New Hampton Fire Department and in the hatchery. I sent out an email on this. So what's going to happen is we're going to meet our normal public meeting at the fire department. We're going to get a presentation on the hatchery. We can ask questions about the hatchery. The hatchery itself is a closed work site. So we are going to go in as the commission. You cannot ask any questions during the tour, but we are going to come back out of the tour, go back into public session, where you can then ask your questions that you had from the tour, and then we'll close out our normal public meeting. Is there any questions or comments about that? And I did specify we aren't going to be providing lunch, but feel free to put that on your mileage. Any questions?
AJ, do you just want to explain to the public
Yep.
on live camera why I can't ask what kind of pipe that is on the ground?
Because you can.
Can you imagine that? This
You
is government
can-
at its best.
You can ask it, you just have to wait until we come back into public session.
And the person that can answer it might not even be at the function.
Diane Timmons has given us the
They'll be
tour, and they will be there, so. But yes, I understand. I know it's not gonna be necessarily the logistically easiest thing to remember all our questions, but it's how we have to do it, it's what the law says, so we're gonna make the best of it. And obviously, this is a big project for us as a commission, this is important, so this is how we're gonna see it.
I'll behave myself.
Yes.
I won't ask any questions when we're down on the construction site.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure that those of us that are on the infrastructure committee will not answer any questions either.
Yes. Not until
I
we're
just
back
can't believe
in
it.
public
But
session.
yeah. I wonder
We did-
which attorney gave you that, Aslan or the other one?
It came from Aslan.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe we should ask the commission's attorney
Well,
about
the
that.
commission's attorney is currently out, so unfortunately, that's how that goes. But anyways, any other questions on the next month's meeting?
I'll just add,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's for full transparency for the public. We will make sure that there is staff there to answer whatever questions you need or you have. And if we're not able to answer them that day, we'll make sure that there's a follow-up. But I'm sure that we'll have the appropriate staff to. You're welcome. I know it's not easy, but we're gonna make the best of it. We will.
And I didn't want to skip out on us not seeing it.
No, I
Is
just,
you know, also part of this. All right, commissioner reports. Any commissioners have anything to report on?
I don't have a report, but I got a couple questions.
Sure.
Chris might have said it earlier. Strategic plans scheduled yet?
Is September 9th at
9th.
1:30.
Okay.
The,
What time?
1:30 in the
1:30.
afternoon.
10:30.
what,
One.
1:30?
Was that 1:30?
1:30.
One, oh, okay.
Yeah.
1:30.
Second,
Nine.
not question, but I got an email from the chairman, which I didn't, but anyway, it said it was from you, wanting me to buy a couple scratch tickets or something.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They even knew that Pat was our treasurer.
Well, it's all public on a website, and
I'll
that's
tell you,
how
they're
phishing
pretty good.
schemes go.
Lots smarter than I am when it comes to that
Right,
stuff.
right.
Wow.
I will never ask you for scratch tickets or gift cards.
This makes about the 20th one I've ever had, so.
Wow. I just have a question. Am I safe to post this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've confirmed a quorum.
Okay, hopefully we
and
have a
coordinated
conference
with the
room.
director.
We'll save that.
Any other questions or any commissioner reports? Not see any. Call to the public. Anybody from the public like to, I'm gonna start in the back there and then just state your name and where you're from for us.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyson Morrill. I serve as the sportsman's representative on the, this is a mouthful, the Governor's Commission for Humane Treatment of Animals. I was nominated by past Director Mason. I've been on the commission for 3 years. I figured this was a good time to reintroduce myself to you folks. We've taken the summer off. We'll be having our next meeting at the end of September. My role representing sportsmen is to walk the fine line between not addressing wildlife issues while on the commission. That's been a clear directive, but really I fit in with situations like working dogs, or I think today's situation with animal damage control. Earlier this spring, we had a lot of discussion regarding some proposed legislation utilizing working dogs for animal damage control, I'm sure as you're aware. And that fostered some healthy discussion with the House and state representatives, which are also on the committee. So as things move forward and you're looking at discussing bills, I'm happy to act as a liaison. I'd like to thank the director for taking the time to meet with me earlier this year. And the one voice kind of between sportsmen, among other groups, including like the state vet, state police, and other individuals. I think it's important to be able to share that perspective. So I also offer that to the legislative committee as well. I live in Belknap County, so I could speak to Commissioner McGonigal as well. But just wanted to reintroduce myself and thank you all for your time. And if anybody has any questions for me now or after, I think Tanya has my contact info as well, so happy to. Thank you.
Representative Harvey.
Representative Catherine Harvey, Cheshire 6, which is Chesterfield, Hinsdale, and Westmoreland. Just a couple quick comments concerning minutes. Obviously, you should always read the minutes, even if you didn't speak at a meeting. The minutes are the legal document of the meeting, and if there's anything incorrect or slightly out of kilter, you're always given the opportunity at a meeting to amend those minutes. So you want your minutes to be as accurate as possible. So yes, you should read them no matter what. And the other comment, when we had the presentation concerning animal damage, there was just one comment and it kind of went by quickly, so I'm not quite sure how this fits into animal damage, but the comment was something about, do you work with pest control applicators? And the answer was yes, I believe. So what I would urge, if you are working with pest control applicators, please don't let them use SCARs. The director has mentioned how dangerous they are for our raptors and even our mammals. So I would just urge that when you work with pest control applicators, I understand the bill has given them the right to use SCARs. Please don't. It's really hurting our wildlife. And the third question is, the meeting in your next month's meeting to see the fishery, is that open to the public too? Can I go?
Tour itself will not close the construction site.
Okay.
But the meeting before and after at the fire station is open to the public.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Steve Andrews Conway. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Director, members of the Commission. I just had a quick question, and it has to do with naming rights. You know, I'm sure we're all familiar with, you know, Gillette Stadium, you know, TD Garden, whatever. And we, Trout Unlimited, recently got an email from the Chief of Inland Fisheries requesting a donation for one of the tanks on the hatchery truck and to have our logo put on the tank. Now that, it's just a very cursory email. It doesn't say what size, or the size of the logo may vary by how much money we're supposed to donate. But I would say all the years I've been here, I didn't even know we were in the naming rights business. So, and by the way, I'm all for it. If it's not illegal to do, every single hatchery, we should go find a commercial organization and put their name on it. You know, we should have the Comcast Fish Hatchery at New Hampton. So if it's possible, but I guess I'm just quizzical about, is this new, is this ongoing, what are the rules, and how do we follow up on all of that? Because of course we don't want to make a $16,000 donation and have a 4-inch by 4-inch logo on a tank. So.
Steve, I'll comment to that. So part of the thing is to engage with our partners, right? And to offer opportunities with partners. The Heritage Foundation has provided quite a bit of financial support to us as an agency, and we want to take those opportunities to also promote them. And I said, well, we should expand that to our other partners. And actually, we do have the right to do that through law, to be able to work with our partners and offer them the opportunity to showcase their emblem as well. And so we thought, what better way than on these new tanks for the hatchery to be able to do that and build that partnership. I'm happy to discuss more with you. We haven't quite gotten into the, $1 for 2 inches, that kind of thing yet, but I'm happy to discuss with you what might work for your organization.
Okay, great, yeah, because it's definitely a revenue stream for the department, no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Well, it is a revenue stream. It also helps us acquire those tanks, right? That's the main thing. And what better way than to illustrate that we're all working together than to do something like that?
Right, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public?
Hello, Linda Dion, Raymond, New Hampshire. I was going to agree with Representative Harvey about sagars and neonics too. I would hope the USDA and Fish and Game wouldn't use any of those poisons, and I think you are against them. You were for the bill, Representative Harvey's bill last year, so, So USDA, the young lady, thank you for that presentation. Don't use poisons of any kind. I was wondering if you use decoys. I didn't hear you mention decoys. I'm sure you do. And I would also like to ask you what you think of the depredation permit, including bows and arrows. What the heck is that all about? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. If you want to scare an animal, you're not going to be out there real quiet with a bow and arrow. So I would like that, addressed and removed. Nobody does what I want, but anyway, I think that's it. And I would like to know what the young lady thinks about the depredation permit, including that, if she could. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about the depredation permit briefly. There are areas where we cannot discharge a firearm, and therefore the alternative, and it's an effective alternative if we are at lethal removal, is to use archery. Okay, so that's why there are compact zones. There are a variety of locations where we are limited in our abilities. Non-lethal is always our first choice, but ultimately sometimes we have to get to a lethal method. And that's where those having that flexibility, it's a tool in the toolbox. Having that flexibility offers us a broader reach to be able to address these conflict issues. Happy to discuss more with you on that piece later on. As far as the decoys, I'd actually like Kat to maybe just give her a little bit more of the limelight here on the decoys. And if you can talk about the pesticide piece, I think people are misunderstanding this, so maybe you can come on up and clarify.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I may have misunderstood the question. I thought we were talking about like nuisance wildlife control operators for different types of
That's
animals.
what I was referring
Okay.
to.
Yeah,
That's
so-
what not pest
Okay.
control.
Yeah, so what I was saying is a lot of our farmers are using wildlife control operators and things like that in order for other animals that may be destroying crops. So like raccoons or something like that may also be destroying crops. It's just a separate thing that's different from our damage program. It's another tool for them to use. So as far as pesticides and things like that, we don't have anything to do with that. That's not something our program is using. That's a different thing. That's really the farmer has to work within their regulations for that. I'm not I can't speak to that. As far as decoys go, yeah. So we do have some options for that. As far as coyote decoys and birds of prey and things like that we do use in conjunction with some other methods. So we find that wildlife can get used to those kinds of things fairly quickly. But when we do put them out, which we do, and we encourage people, move them around often and use them with noisemakers and things like that, maybe repellents that make the plants taste bad. That way they're a little bit more effective. But yeah, they're again just something else that we can have at our disposal to use and something that we are lending out to people.
Thanks, Kat. If you have anything else you want to add to the depredation piece, feel free. I just wanted to tackle that myself initially.
Yep.
So.
Nope, happy to answer more questions, and I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to clarify that about the pesticides.
Thank you.
Separate, yeah. Thank you.
What is a pre-depredation permit? Is that all?
Yeah, so a pre-damage permit, it's written in rule. So basically, commercial growers that meet our requirements, their land's not posted, and they're commercial, are entitled to apply for and receive 2 pre-damage tags. Those are only for deer, and essentially there's no damage threshold, so the depredation permits have a substantial damage threshold needs to be met before they can be issued those permits. But we allow farmers to apply for 2 pre-damage permits which do not have the same threshold. Essentially, the idea is that they can get ahead of some of that damage if they're seeing damage early, before they get to that 10% damage, which, is a pretty large financial burden for a lot of these farms to have 10% damage. They can start attempting to address that issue before that threshold.
No, that's fine. Sorry.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kat. Any other questions from the public? Not seeing any. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.